Hello, Dave.
How you doing, Bruce?
Good. I always have to remind myself to keep an eye on the attendee list,
No,
because otherwise you're
that's okay.
hanging out.
It's good. While I was in the waiting room, I just was searching on some stuff using the browser, and so Zoom was actually in the background. But
Yeah,
then
right.
when you admitted me, it actually brought it to the foreground.
Yeah, no, that's what I'm doing here. I just brought Val in. He just signed on. Yeah, generally I'm getting used to this. I'd much rather be in person, but
Mhm.
It works though. I mean, it's not like it's not perfect, but it does work.
Yeah.
This is my third Zoom meeting today,
oh yeah,
and I have one more after this. And I'm sitting here at home, and I would have been in a car all day driving around making all these meetings. So
Yeah. I was talking. I was just before this. I was on the phone with Bill Hatch up in Gorham, and he's the chair of JL Car, and he's like, this is perfect for him. So,
yeah, it works pretty well. I mean, first meeting this morning was with the SB 190 CTE committee, and then I had a board meeting of the New Hampshire Learning Initiative, and now I'm having this meeting, and then after this I have a board meeting for the New Hampshire Philharmonic. So I'm just
fantastic.
zipping along.
Mm-hmm. Hey, Mel.
How are we doing?
All right.
still good.
Oh, where's my?
Hi, Susan.
Hi, Dave. How are you?
Good.
I'm looking for my video. There we
There
go.
we go.
Okay.
There we go.
You can't get away from things, can you, Susan? Just when you thought you were retired and enjoying things,
Well, Val, and I really had just started to figure it out. So I was a developmental educator for a long time. So I just say I'm like my students. I need to repeat the course and try it again. So I'll try it again next summer.
You didn't really want to retire anyhow, right?
That's true. Yeah. I don't quite understand that, but
No, I'm in the same boat. I can't imagine retiring, so.
it's mostly the people I hang out with, my husband and my daughter, my granddaughter, and so on.
Yeah, we're having too much fun now in the midst of this pandemic. We're just swamped with business. So we we make parts for the saliva diagnostic equipment to determine if you have COVID-19 or not. The Rutgers saliva test. And there's a company in Massachusetts that's making the equipment, and we sell a component to them, and they just keep ordering and ordering and ordering. And it's pretty neat. They can do 10,000 tests per day per machine, which is an incredible sampling rate. And since it's all saliva, it's pretty quick sample collection. So they said the entire UK has ordered, like 50 or 80 of these machines is put around the country so they can do hundreds of thousands of tests per day.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah. So they keep asking us, how fast can we make the parts for them?
Wow.
So how many shifts do you have going?
Two shifts, and we work a 10-hour day. So it's really 20 out of 24 hours. And then we're working overtime. So there's another 20-hour day on Friday. So
Wow.
busy.
Wow.
And, you don't have 100% of the people. So, there's always somebody out for some reason or, so it's a challenge.
Do you have to deal with sanitation issues and stuff like that?
I mean, the normal stuff for manufacturing. So hand washing and,
Yeah.
Sanitizers and social distancing and lots of air motion to keep the virus from alighting on some surface someplace. So yeah, it's not bad. We haven't stopped working. We never shut down. We just kept running. So, we've gotten used to it.
When did you see the real upturn in making this particular part for the Massachusetts company?
if you recall, there was an article in a paper early April, like on a Monday. That said, Rutgers came out with this test. I hand delivered parts on Friday of that same week.
Wow.
So the last month or so, we have orders for 1,500 of these parts to go into that unit, and they just placed an order for another 600. So it's moving quickly. We'll have a milling machine tied up for a month, machining these parts. So it's busy.
It is interesting to see the industries that have benefited from this or have,
Yeah,
really.
well, I feel like an arms manufacturer in the midst of a hot war. We're making the rifles, and we're busy. I mean, the other places are shut down. 70% of what we make goes to medical equipment, so everyone's asking for stuff.
Yeah. At least you're playing for the right side, Val.
That is correct. That's right. We're making the guns for the heroes of this. So, I mean, it's amazing. You get some pretty emotional calls from customers, almost in tears, asking you if you could pick up the pace because they have such a demand for their product and they're helping people save lives. And it's, everyone really, they take it to heart. I mean, they may not be on the front line as we normally see, but people making support equipment and analytical equipment, whatever field they're, part of the life saving that's going on as well. So they can get pretty emotional about it.
So let's see, how are we doing here? Seeing 17. Who are we missing? I know we're going to miss Dave Ryan. He's got 2 sets of graduations to conduct this afternoon.
Oh, nice.
Nice beard, Beardmore.
Yeah.
You're living up to your name.
Be nice, Bill. I'll start picking on. Is that you, Bill?
Yes, it looks great.
Thanks, Bill.
Hello, John. Hey, Mary. I think we're missing Jay. Yeah?
I think that's it in terms of who we're expecting.
Yeah. So why don't we get started, because we got a lot on the docket, and when Jay we'll just recognize Jay when he jumps in. So let's see. I'd like to call to order the meeting of the commission to study school funding. Today's June 8th, 2020 at 2:00 in the afternoon. And let's see, Jordan, how are we looking with our tech check?
Looking good. Yeah.
Okay, nobody stranded, no phone calls? All right, fantastic. Just a quick review of meeting protocols. Any votes we take are going to be roll called. We're going to start the meeting in a minute by a roll call of the commission members and others. And if you just sort of indicate where you are and if there's anybody in the room with you, that would be terrific. And then we'll get started. And here's Senator Khan. So great. I'll start with the roll call now for attendance. I'm Dave Luno, here in Hopkinton, and Ozzie, the long-haired dachshund, is with me. So Mel?
Mel Myler, I'm here in Contoocook in my home by myself.
Great. Dick Ames?
Yes, I'm here, and I'm in Jaffrey in my home, and I'm alone.
Okay. Rick Ladd? Where'd Rick go? Nope, he's there. He's just muted.
He's muted, yeah.
I'm unmuted now.
Yep.
Rick Ladd's here, alone in Haverhill.
All righty. Jay Kahn.
Here in Concord, all by myself.
Okay. And John Morgan.
You want to close?
Yeah.
Oh, John.
I am here in the car with my family. Long story, but I'm here.
All right. Thanks, John. Bill Ardinger.
Hi, hello everyone. I am in Concord. I have some folks working around the house. My wife is somewhere in the house, but other than that, alone right now.
Sounds good. Jane Bergeron.
Jane Bergeron here in Litchfield, home alone with my black lab Otis.
Okay. And Corrine Cascadin.
Yep, Corrine Cascadin. I'm in my home office in Berlin by myself.
All right, thanks. Let's see, Dave Ryan is at, I guess, Exeter High School graduations. Is that right, John? Are they graduating today?
I'm not certain about that. They have multiple grad days where they're doing their ceremonies.
Right. So so a huge congratulations to all the seniors from Exeter, and looking forward to hearing about you know, what they're doing down the road. So certainly our thoughts are with them. John Beardmore.
John Beardmore alone in Hopkinton.
All right, thanks, John. Iris Estabrook.
Hi, home alone in Portsmouth.
Thanks, Iris. Barbara Tremblay.
Barbara Tremblay, I'm here at home in Keene, and husband and workmen are outside.
Okay, thanks, Barbara. Chris Dwyer.
Chris Dwyer in Portsmouth, and I am at my home.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Susan Huard.
Susan Hewitt alone in Hooksett.
Thanks, Susan. Val Zanchuk.
I'm home alone in Concord.
All right, and Mary Heath.
Mary Heath, home alone in Manchester.
Okay, great. And let's see, we've got Jen 4.
Hi, Jen 4 calling in from Concord, home alone.
Okay, great. And we've got, let's see, Jordan Hensley.
Jordan Hensley, here in Dover, just me and the dog.
Okay, and we've got Bruce Mallory.
Calling in from Kittery Point, my home office. I'm here alone.
Okay, thanks, Bruce. And we've got Michelle Holt-Shannon.
Coming in from Dover, I'm with Jonah the cat and Archie the dog.
Okay. All right. We've got, let's see.
Drew is on the call.
We've got Drew from AIR. Drew.
Hi, Drew Atchison from AIR. I'm in Washington, D.C., and I'm here with a few people at home, working from home as well, but in the room by myself at the moment.
Okay, great. Well, as far as I can tell, I think we got everybody. Did I miss anybody? I don't think so. So great. I don't really have any particularly interesting opening remarks, other than it's been, I'll tell you, every day has just been incredibly busy with this commission, whether it's commission meetings, work group meetings, planning meetings, meetings with the AIR team. But I gotta say that Bruce and his team at Carsey have just been extraordinary in terms of their support for this commission's work, and I just want to thank them. I can't thank them enough for the energy they're putting into this effort. And as someone was sort of commenting or questioning me the other day, Dave, when was the last time the state of New Hampshire really engaged in this type of process? I think it was 1984. So it's been a while, and so it's long overdue, and I want to just thank everybody for putting the enormous amount of time that they're putting into this. I'm somewhat hopeful that we can get pretty soon get on the 1 week we have a commission meeting, the next week we have work group meetings, the following week we have a commission meeting. I know we had a lot of catch up to do, and there's certainly a flurry of activity over the last month and a half, in terms of trying to play catch up, get the work groups up and running. But feel good about where the progress that the work groups have been making. I've been, and a number of commission members have been attending all of the work group meetings, and that's great to see, because I think even if you're not on a work group, it helps to inform what you're doing, and certainly there's been very strong presentations in there. It's on the agenda, but really I wanted to ask Mary Heath if she could just sort of, I know she's been following the department's school redesign and reopening task force, and talk with us for a minute about that, and see if there's something we need to do in looking at that. So Mary, can I turn it over to you?
You sure can. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Actually, with regard to START, I think it has huge implications on the work that we're doing right now. We've never really gone through anything like this before. And I think we are at a point where, at this point in time, I'd like to make a motion regarding START and the task force, and especially regarding the survey that was distributed by the Department of Ed to parents and educators. And my request is that the chair request from the commissioner a copy of the survey, the respondents, and the resulting data provided by the survey. My understanding is that there are over 50,000 responses, and I think the resulting information is relevant to our work considering the current circumstances. I think what's going on with START and the task force has a lot to do. So I would like the commission to entertain my motion, and then we can have a discussion thereof. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Mary. I don't know if we need a motion to do that, but I'm happy to do it and to do that inside of a motion. So there's been a motion for the commission to request the survey and data collected as through the START process. Is there a second on that motion?
I'll second that, David.
Okay, so seconded by Mel Myler, and I'd like to open up the floor to any sort of discussion about that, or we can have some discussion about it once we get the data too. So,
Dave, it would be helpful to have a little background information on the survey.
Okay, I think that's a good question, Dick, and let me. I'm going to just add a 2 cents and then hand it over to Mary on that. But there was a survey that was conducted. It was widely publicized. I think a number of different stakeholders, and I've heard rumors up to like 50,000 responses to this. I know I was hoping to sort of click over to it and get it, but didn't. It was live for a short period of time, and now my understanding is that it's not available, so you can't go look at what the survey questions were. But Mary, you know a lot more about it than I do.
Sure. Speaking from my own school district, I know that our superintendent sent out the message from the commissioner and asked all the teachers and parents to fill out the survey. I briefly looked at the survey because a school board member sent it to me. I wish I had printed it at that point in time, because then when I went back to get a copy, it was gone. But it's something that really talks to a lot of the different circumstances going on, and particularly to the reactions to online instruction. And there's a lot of information that's been collected. I don't know the exact nature of all the questions because I didn't go through the whole thing, but I think it's something that we need to take a look at and hear exactly what the commission is doing. We know that there's a large amount of money that came through to school districts to support the work as a result of the costs that are associated with the COVID virus. So I think there's a lot of information out there that we need to use as part of our work.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Any other questions, thoughts?
Yeah, my concern is that as we begin to look at the whole issue of adequacy, I think there's a direct relationship to the commissioner's task force that he's created for the start as it relates to the future of education within the state. And I think there is a direct relationship between some of our work and that of the commissioner's work, and there needs to be an understanding on the part of the department clearly about what we're trying to do, and the adequacy work group, for example, as it relates to some of the feedback that he's getting from that survey.
David, could I just add too that I think there are some issues that are particular, and it's access to opportunities. How do we know that all children had access to online opportunities? And then the second piece is the difficulties for children on IEPs. I think that there were some significant things that I've heard, but I mean, did the survey touch that? And I think that's something that we've got to think about in the future.
Okay, okay, thanks, Mary. Any other questions, thoughts on this? Rick?
Yeah, I have a concern that I heard this morning, because I was docking the survey with others, that it would be released within the next 2 weeks. I don't know if it's the domain of this commission, who's tasked to do other specific things, to be then directing an executive branch of the government to release something. I think all intents are there. It will be released. I know that they're just not ready to do that at this point in time.
Okay. Okay. Any other thought, Barbara?
Yes, I heard the same thing, Rick, that it was going to be released in a couple of weeks. My concern is this, is I don't want us to be going off in one direction and the commissioner be going off in yet another direction. You know, we need to understand and see the data that is there. Are there other intents with that survey that we may not be privy to at this time? We need to know what is contained and what the data shows us. Certainly, there will be a lot about disparity that we've been talking about for our special ed students and all of our students, and learning in this manner is very challenging for many of our students, whether they're identified or not. So I think we need to be privy to this data as soon as possible. So again, we're not going in one direction. The commissioner is going in another direction. We need to make sure we're heading in the right direction at this time.
I have no problem with the chair of this commission sending a letter to the Commissioner of Education saying that this committee is moving in the direction of looking at adequacy and the funding of adequacy, the costing of it. And we would very much appreciate his directing that survey, the raw materials and all, to this commission as soon as possible, doing it in an administrative fashion rather than a vote of the commission.
You know, I like that too, Rick. And that's typically how I've done things. So if Mary and Mel are okay with that, I'm more than happy on behalf of the commission to request the department to transmit to us the survey and the data that was collected as a result of it. So yeah, Corinne?
I received it from someone this morning, and from what I understand in checking with North Country superintendents, none of the superintendents received those results, but I do have a copy of it that a school employee got through Career and Technical Ed in some fashion. I certainly can send that to you now if you want those. If you want that.
You know, the results and the collected data, you know, can be two different things, and so if I don't necessarily want something that was somewhat produced by the department, but I don't know if, I mean.
I don't know
Yeah.
who sent it.
Yeah, I don't know. So, but if we just sort of stuck with more of the raw stuff, and then as the department works on it and produces a report, obviously happy to get that as well. But you know, would the commission be okay without getting into a motion, that we just proceed sort of along the lines as what Rick was suggesting, just requesting? I'll request to get that.
I think that's fine, Dave. One suggestion is that you, if the data is going to take longer to get, that at least you get the survey form so we can all be on the same page in terms of what was asked.
Okay. Okay.
Jay has his hand up.
Yeah. Jay?
All in favor. With.
Well, we can't vote other than roll.
I'm just saying what Rick said and your offer to correspond on behalf of the commission, I think is totally in order. Okay. So thank you, Mary, for bringing it up. I heard a second part to your statement that in addition to the survey, I know that school districts, relative to the $33 million that was CARES Act money distributed, that each school district needed to complete a request for those dollars. In other words, they needed to make a claim as to how the dollars were needed by their district in order to meet the needs that the remote learning pivot required of their district. I raised that again because it sounded that you were including that as significant material for this committee potentially to look at. And I agree. I don't know if we're able to sift through that and determine which of those costs might be ongoing as opposed to one time. But clearly, we've heard from the school business officers that technology expenses are ongoing, and they've challenged us to consider that they're not just a person that helps teachers. It's an infrastructure, it's equipment. So, Mr. Chairman, it is. I think it's appropriate then, and I asked, for anybody in the committee to consider this, but that the chairman's letter also ask for information regarding the school district's requests for those funds, for the purpose of understanding what were one-time and ongoing expenses that might be significant for this committee to understand relative to adequacy or differential needs.
Right.
Okay.
I think that there's some concerns that Ways and Means, from what I gathered this morning, from a bipartisan perspective, they're recognizing that our revenues could be a shortfall of anywhere from $354 million up to $594 million. Dick Ames, I think, mentioned this the other day. And whether any of the balance or funds from this federal money could be used to offset. Well, current legislation, federal stuff, says no, it can't be. But who knows if there's another stimulus package or not another stimulus package, those rules may change. So, this whole thing is just very much a balancing up in the air type thing so far, and without many answers to this. There's some communities, municipalities, that are receiving more money than they have need for. Do they have to return that money? All these are unanswered questions.
Yeah, we have a lot of unanswered questions. Thanks, Rick.
Can I add to that?
Yep. Please, Corinne.
So I've been working on that application. There are basically 5 questions that needed to be submitted. It's not so much the questions that might be relevant to this committee, but if the state had some way of compiling some of those answers, it would give us an idea as to what people are asking for. Because it's asking you how the district's going to determine the most important needs as a result of the virus. It also, you have to answer a proposed timeline of when you're going to provide services and assistance. And you have to describe the extent to which the LEA intends to use the funds to promote remote learning. And then it asks about what high quality diagnostic tools you plan to use. So it's difficult to answer because it's geared towards how to increase or improve remote learning.
Yeah, and without having made a determination what the efficacy of that delivery of instruction was, to actually use the word promote in there seems a bit premature, in my opinion. But
right, but that is the word.
Yeah, Jane.
So I would just expand on what Mary had said in terms of the information being collected. It is a task force looking at both re-entry and redesign. And if in fact there is an intent for redesign of how education is delivered, it would seem that it would be important that this committee know that and what the financial implications of that could be. I serve on one of the work groups for the task force, and the timelines have all been moved up. The guidelines or recommendations were supposed to be issued at the end of June. We're now looking at early July.
Great, thanks very much, Shane. Yeah. Any other thoughts while we're here? I've got a couple things on my action list for this. Asking the department for the survey and the data collected from that survey, and the results of the RFI to districts with respect to COVID-19 and remote instruction related costs and funds.
I think Mary had a comment, and then we probably should move along.
I think it's important, though, that we really, the structure of school may not look the same for the next year until we get a vaccine. The structure of school might be different. And I think there are a lot of implications for what does adequacy mean in light of what we're going through. I don't think this is something that we can just dismiss as an anomaly, because, I mean, indeed, it could happen again. We don't know. So I think there's information. I don't know if it means that somebody comes and reports to us or talks about it, but there's a big emphasis on online learning. And I've heard comments such that, my family likes this better than regular school. So, I mean, what is his intent with the task force? Where's he going? What does he think that school is going to look like? And there's a lot going on, and we're kind of subtracted from it all, as are many, simply because of the way we live right now. So I think there's information that just really relates to the work of this group. So thank you. That's a lot of talking. I'll be quiet now.
No, I appreciate it.
I second that, Mary. That was my issue, was finding out what is the intent, because I think there's more information there that we need to know. If we go down again one path and we develop a sense of definition of what is contained in adequacy, and the commissioner and that group is thinking something entirely different, we need to know now.
Okay.
Not after. Thank you.
Thanks, Barbara. Chris, did you have something you want?
Well, yes, just to say that, I mean, I've been working on these issues with the Federal Department of Education. It's something all states are doing. All states responsibly, that are being responsible about this, are doing this now, looking at various scenarios for adapting to different models in the future. We've learned from some of our states like Florida and Texas that are prone to hurricanes that, you know, they've had these kinds of plans in place for a while. How do you pivot? I think it's about adaptability. I don't think it's what we're doing in just the short run, but adequacy is about the capacity of districts and schools to be able to adapt to different circumstances. That may be a natural disaster, maybe health issues in a community.
Oh, we lost Chris.
What happened? All right.
Come back.
Yep. Well, and absolutely. I mean, we could have used this. What was it? 14 years ago, we had a ice storm that knocked schools out for 5 days or more. So, so this will be something that certainly will be useful in a lot of different situations. So, anyway, Chris, did Chris come back?
Yes, it's an internet in and out day for me. So I think in terms of, you know, the capacity of a district is about being able to adapt, and there are costs to that. There are preparations related to that, but it's something that I think would be an aspect of adequacy, but not only for one purpose or in the short run.
Okay. Thanks very much, Chris. John, yeah.
Dave, would it make sense to invite the commissioner to come speak to this group about what his goals are for the START committee? It might, and just generally how he and his department think about adequacy aid and the issues that we're working on. It just seems kind of curious that we've not heard much from the department yet. I know Caitlin's been helpful early on when we were meeting in person and attended most of our meetings. I don't know if she or others from the department have been following us closely or at all since. Maybe they have, maybe they haven't, but you know, it seems like it might be a chance to have the commissioner join us and go over at the very least this START initiative and where he's going on this. I knew about it, but since you've been talking about this, I've pulled it up on my other screen, and it seems like it's sort of open-ended in its timeline. It does reference a goal of 6:30 to put some thoughts together regarding next year, but there is reference to sort of an ongoing input from this group. So, you know, rather than just get data that we don't necessarily understand what the goal or the uses of that data are, maybe it makes sense to hear directly from the commissioner.
Well, I think that's a great idea, John, and I could certainly extend that invitation to the commissioner when I reach out to him about the other information. And I mean, it seems like a forever ago, but you know, one of the things we did early on, that this commission did early on, was conduct a stakeholders meeting, and I think it was convened at UNH Law, and the commissioner was invited to that, and he graciously declined to come to that, although it was well attended by a number of other people and organizations. But I think it would be timely. And there's obviously been a lot that's happened since that stakeholders meeting, and we've learned a lot in that intervening time as well. So I will reach out to him. And Bruce, I work with you to we can get that woven into something that fits his schedule and fits our schedule. So
yeah, we'll do that. And as you know, I've also reached out to him and to Drew Klein, and so far, we haven't been able to find a time or establish an opportunity for them to come join us. And maybe that the Deputy Commissioner, Christine Brennan, might also be somebody that could be useful to us.
Mm-hmm. But just for everybody's benefit, though, the department has been extraordinarily helpful, though, as they always have been, with access to data, and we're in touch regularly with Caitlin Davis and others in the department. to help us in that regard. And this is a big subject of where AIR is right now in the data collection process. So I did want to let everybody know that work with the department certainly continues to add value to what we do. All right. Anything else while we're at this stop? Because we got a lot to get through, and you know, did we circulate minutes from the last two meetings?
They've been posted. I'm not sure whether Jordan was.
Well, actually,
no,
Yeah, they were in an email.
Yeah, Bruce, the one you sent on yesterday, I believe, had
Yes.
both copies attached.
Thank you.
Okay, had both. Because I found the May 11th online, but I missed it in the. All right. Did people have a chance to give those minutes a look-see? We can take a motion to approve the minutes from the May 11th and May 26th commission meetings.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Motion's been moved. Is there a second? And seconded by Barbara. Further discussion on either of these sets of minutes, and we'll do one roll call vote and get it taken care of. So we'll start with Mel Myler.
Yes.
Dick Games.
Yes.
Rick Ladd. Jay Kahn.
Yes.
Oh, Rick was there. I'm sorry.
Yes, go ahead.
All right. John Morgan. Is he with us?
No.
Nope. Bill Ardinger.
Yes.
Jane Bergeron.
Yes.
Corinne Cascadden.
Yes. Yes.
John Beard. David Ryan's absent. John Beardmore.
Yep.
Iris Estabrook.
Yes.
Barbara Tremblay.
Yes.
Chris Dwyer.
Yes.
Susan Huard.
Yes.
Val Zanchuk.
Yes.
Mary Heath.
Yes.
Okay, so both the sets of minutes are approved. And getting down into, we're running a little bit behind. We wanted to do work group updates. Bruce, do we need these? Very quickly, maybe?
We are behind very quickly. I think what's most important is to reinforce the focus group, stakeholder focus groups that are coming up, and encourage members of the commission to reach out to their networks to encourage folks who fit the description of the kinds of people we're searching for to register. Michelle, do you want to comment on that a little bit? That's coming up starting tomorrow, actually. And so let's just emphasize that for a couple of minutes, and then maybe we don't need to spend too much time on the other two work groups.
Well, you should get that invitation in your email box today. I think Jordan's going to send it along. And the group that we're targeting are school board members, district budget people, town council folks, people who are voting on managing and taking a close look at school budgets. And we have several people registered already for this week. Then we skip a week, and then the next week we have another round of focus groups. It's all the same. We just thought we'd spread it out a little bit depending on people's schedules and when folks can, might be dealing with graduations and things. So feel free to share that with folks fit that constituency group. And we're also just emphasizing that we have other outreach opportunities that are coming, that this is really for folks who are familiar with the lingo and familiar with looking closely at school budgets.
Thanks, Michelle. I think it's important, and you may have just said it, and I just may have not processed it. But when we started talking about this, these are going to be geographic.
Right, and now because we're online, we have a different opportunity, which is people can register into the date and time that fits their schedule. And we actually anticipate that we may have folks, from very different parts of the state in the same focus group, which we think actually will be, a nice opportunity for people to talk from different regions. So they're not geographically based this round, but we're going to try and take advantage of that diversity. And the other thing is that if you all, you may also, you'll see in the invitation, if you want to join and listen in to one, just feel free to register. And just at some point, I think the facilitator, or when you introduce yourself, you can just let people know that you are a commissioner and that you'll just be listening. But you are welcome, of course, to be there and to listen in. We'll be forwarding a summary of all the conversations and the themes from the conversations.
Great, thank you, Michelle. Bruce, or Mel, did you have anything to add on?
No, other than the fact that I'm sorry, but I missed you for the last couple of minutes. But I think perhaps Michelle said this. This is a unique opportunity. Because we might have the mayor of Berlin, for example, and a selectman from Rye on the same conversation. And that was one of the reasons why we made the decision to kind of put it open so that the dialogue can be very rich, because rarely do you have an opportunity from across the state to hear multiple voices from different places talking about the same topic. So I'm very excited about the possibility of the multi-strata of potential participants in these engagements that we're going to be having this week and next.
Great, thanks Mel. Jay, do you want to take a half a minute on adequacy?
The half a minute is to tee up the discussions that will happen in a week on early childhood education, right? Pre-K, Bruce?
Yes.
We're aiming for down the road. I don't know if we've yet scheduled for building operation and capital expenditures, but building aid has been, and it's a part of the adequacy formula. And if I add one other thing, we do have a draft of adequacy updated since 2008. I think we mentioned that. And I think part of the task of the committee that we've focused on with last week, inviting Kelly Antiat from the Department of Education Behavioral Health side, and Erica Ongarelli of the DHHS Behavioral Health and Wellness side, to talk with this, as well as Eric Fraworth from Career and Technical Education. So the point is, we've talked about the bushel basket of adequacy. Is it limited to 193 E2A goals, or is it what each child needs in order to be successful with the opportunities and advantages of an education in the state of New Hampshire, our constitutional mandate? And so that's what these inquiries have helped us sort through, is how is behavioral health and wellness shaped up in schools with a local control mandate, but statewide guidelines as to what they need to implement, and a career technical education where it's a shared responsibility of local funding and state funding, and how adequate is all that relative to providing an equal opportunity to all students in the state. And we've clearly identified there are disparities, and some schools have these things and some schools don't. And they by statute are really designed to help all students. So it raises these questions about how broad a definition of adequacy. Do we focus on just the inputs, as some schools have it and don't? Or do we focus on the outcomes, that these are the things that students need to be successful, and do they get included either on a student by student basis or on a district wide basis. So, all right, that's the teeing up, and hopefully adequate enough for what you were looking for.
Thanks, Jay. And I'll take a quick 30 seconds on fiscal policy. I got to say, last week's presentations were fantastic, both in adequacy and fiscal policy, and really I think put a lot on the table. One of the things that got a lot of traction last Friday during fiscal policy was the idea of setting up a swept day. So because there's lots of, obviously swept has been part of the fiscal policy equation, the fiscal policy mix over the last 20 years, and it's had its various ups and downs and things, but to really sort of get the history of swept, get the history of litigation of as far as swept, and really sort of understand more about the volatility or stability of that as a revenue source, and that also ties in with some work that the fiscal policy work group is doing right now on tasks 1 and 2, which are being led up by Rick Ladd and Dick Ames, and identifying the various components that make up the fiscal policy, and particularly digging down at the state level of what the various revenue sources are that go into the non-swept state dollars that are used for school funding, and really trying to take a look at some volatility that could be associated with those revenue sources. Obviously, right at the top of this meeting, talked about how, I think Rick mentioned how Ways and Means has really downgraded the revenue picture substantially based on the economic situation that the state is going through and still faces ahead of it. So that is all forthcoming. The swept day, whether that's a fiscal policy work group or commission, will sort of sort that out. And with that, I will conclude fiscal policy report and hand it over to Bruce.
And I'll recognize Jay's got a question first.
Oh, sorry about that.
Not so much a question as while we're handing out the recognitions, I want to thank Michael Tierney and John Tobin. It was just last Monday. They did run through their arguments around school funding, and that provided, I think, some comparable information to what we got from school business officers, but their presentations were PowerPoint driven, and as were the behavioral health and career technical education presentations. So I think they're on our website, and in the other that I don't think we gave, I didn't last time, mention and thank New Hampshire Reaching Higher for their presentation a couple of weeks ago, which started to peel away the layers on disparities and what are some of the variables that drive disparities, including most importantly the socioeconomic variables of poverty and parent education, other kinds of things that are influence outcomes. So, I mean, that too is on our website. So we're starting to build up quite a treasury of documents that I guess we just all need to kind of try to review to keep pace with the information that we do have.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Jay.
So thanks, Dave and Jay and everybody else. And Dave, thanks for your generous words at the beginning of this meeting. It's been an honor and a good challenge for CARSI to be involved in this work. It's personally been extremely satisfying to me as an educator. So we'll contract our time a little bit going forward, but we want to take the next step on what we had called our design thinking process when we're organizing ourselves now what seems like years ago, but just months ago, and come back to what we've learned so far about a definition of the problem and all the components that enter into that consideration of our definition of the problem, and particularly the definition of an adequate education, since that's one of our primary charges as a commission. So let me frame this for a couple of minutes and then move into the conversation, the discussion. At the top of the document that's on the screen right now, the steps that are a part of design thinking are laid out. And we haven't really talked that much about the empathize, the very first step in this process. I think our empathy, or the ability to empathize with the circumstances of communities and school leaders and teachers and parents and property taxpayers, has been a part of our thinking. But in some ways, we want to lift that up now. And Dave always reminds us that what we're really interested in here is understanding the end users of the work that we're producing. In this case, we could say the end users, of course, are students, their parents, their teachers, their school administrators and leaders, their elected community leaders, and their property taxpayers, ultimately, who are, to such a large degree, and especially in New Hampshire, the ones who are responsible for resourcing our public schools. So in the conversation we're about to have, what I'm asking you to do is, as we go through the questions, the two big questions that are going to focus our conversation is, wear the hat that you're wearing here in the commission as an elected representative, as a school leader, as a business leader, as a former representative, as a community leader, but also empathize, and that is, think about those end users, both those that occupy school buildings, but also those that pay for those school buildings and what goes on inside them. So that's just a comment that I wanted to make kind of going into this. The process that we're going to use is described on the agenda that you have. And initially we thought we might use the small group breakout format, which Zoom meetings allow, but Zoom webinar does not allow. And so this will stay as a committee of the whole for this conversation. And I'm going to bring up the agenda as well, just so we can follow what the steps are we're asking you to engage in now. So you have the 2-page document that's called Design Thinking on top of it. What I'm asking you to do first is to review, just on page 1, the various definitions of our problem that we've been trying to address. And the very first one, number 1 on that document, is taken from the legislation authorizing and establishing this commission. The second item on there is the fiscal neutrality language that our chair keeps grounding our work in. And then items 3 through 8 are verbatim from the homework that this group did, again, several weeks ago now, if not months, when we asked you to define the problem. And we looked at what are the top 3 sort of common ways of defining this problem that rose to the surface. And so items 3 through 8 are to that effect.
Bruce.
So what I'm asking you to do is,
Bruce,
yes, go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt. 2 things. If you can make your document just a little bit bigger, it'd be easier for people to see. And I think you were just referring to something else. And so.
Well, I'm referring both to our agenda and then back to the design thinking document.
Okay, great. I know you have to unshare and reshare, so it's always.
Yeah, I was doing, I thought I had done that.
Yep.
So we'll stop that and then we'll come back up.
Thanks.
To the design thinking document.
Always learning.
I don't know how to toggle back and forth. I don't think there's a split screen function here.
There isn't. You just have to share, unshare, reshare.
Yeah, so go back and forth. So the task, this first task, is for each commission member to take a few minutes now to jot down notes in response to the question at the bottom of this first page. Given these definitions of the problem on the top of that page, what would be your 2 to 3 sentence version of this question of what is the overall problem that we're trying to address? So I'm going to ask you to spend a few minutes individually. I'm going to time you for about 3 minutes or so. And then we're just gonna do a whip around the room, so to speak. And I'm gonna ask each member to share with us very briefly, in a minute or less, what you wrote down essentially. It doesn't have to be articulate, it doesn't have to be eloquent. It's just going to kind of capture and listen to each other, carefully listen to each other, what we think are the core elements of this challenge might be. Drawing on the language that's on page 1 here and introducing your own language as well. After that, we're going to take a look at the second round of a kind of a deeper discussion of the elements of this problem, especially related to disparities. After we hear from each member, after the sort of round robin, we'll pause and reflect as a whole group for a few minutes before we go to page 2, before we go to the disparities question. Does anybody have any questions about the process that I'm asking you to engage in now? In that case, the clock is running and I'll check back with you in 2 or 3 minutes. Make some wise notes to yourselves. Just putting the process back up again so people can reference that as they need to. Take another minute or so. Okay, wrap up that wisdom, last brilliant thought. Michelle has now posted in chat all of those questions, so you can reference that easily if you need to. And I'll go back just to this design thinking page for the moment. And the way this will work is that we're just going to go around robin and just going to have each person to take time to share what they've said. We won't have time right now for you to process and have a conversation about each person's input.
So are you calling on people, or do you want me to kick it off?
Yeah, Dave, why don't you do that? Why don't you?
Okay. So I started writing stuff down, but none of the thoughts that I'm writing down come close to, I think, the authenticity of a Facebook post that I saw over the weekend, and I'll sort of read from that a little bit, and I think it speaks to this sort of first section of empathy and understanding a problem from a user's perspective. But this is from a neighbor here in Hopkinton, and obviously we're going through some school budget challenges for the next year here. But anyway, this is what she writes. Don't let your candidates for public office off the hook. Ask them when and how they're going to fix school funding in New Hampshire. And then she cites, this is a 2 million property, 7,600 square foot house on 27 acres in Center Harbor. The estimated property taxes are a little more than twice of what my family pays in Hopkinton. But my family home is not worth 2 million, or even 1 million, or even $500,000. Let's see. In fact, here's another thing. She writes, an $800,000 property on Lake Waukesha in Center Harbor comes with a property tax that is considerably less than mine. It goes on to say, Center Harbor sends its students to the Interlake School District. Preschool through 12th grade cost per pupil for Interlakes is about $5,000 more than the pre-K to 12 cost per pupil in Hopkinton. $5,000 more per pupil. I doubt they're pink slipping their entire support staff, which is something that happened in Hopkinton last week. Towns all over New Hampshire would not have to go through the heart-wrenching school budget fights if we stopped relying on regressive. You know what? I don't need to really read this part because she's sort of jumping into a solution. But let me share it anyway.
1 minute.
So all right, then I'll stop there.
All right, good. Anyway, that was a nice grounding and real life example. I'm just going to go on my screen. I'm going to go in order that I see on my screen, so it's a little bit random. So be aware that I'm about to call on Susan Heward. And unmute yourselves as you come on. And I'm going to give you again about a minute. Thank you.
Okay, with a minute. I think the problem is how to fund public education to reduce the gap between opportunities and outcomes by improving the ed funding to equalize the educational opportunity. So a combination of 6 and 8 with a little bit extra.
And done in 18 seconds, I'll have to say. All of us can learn from you. Thank you. And by the way, of course, all this is being recorded. We'll have this in the minutes. So we'll be processing this in a variety of ways going forward. Barbara Tremblay, you're next on my screen.
That's great. I did a combination of things like Susan did. My big one is what should be included in supporting an equitable education. So starting off with, for me, is what is included. And I have a whole list of things which I won't spend the time on now, the big bucket. But I also included numbers 6 and 8, as did Susan. Looking at equalizing educational opportunity, I feel is a crucial piece for the disparity issue that we face. And number 8, again, to reduce the gap. So one is that definition of an equitable, or if we have to use the term adequate education, and then something to do with somehow avoiding, getting rid of the disparity that we're seeing for educational opportunities.
Good, thank you. And of course, that the other piece about what goes in that bucket will be part of our round 2 conversation.
Right, sorry.
And I'll just remind all of us, as myself as well, is to really listen to what each person is saying rather than just thinking about what you're about to say. It's a trick that sometimes I have to remind myself to do as well. And Jane, you're the next on my screen.
I wrote down coming up with a funding formula that allows for equity in our preschool, pre-K through 12 public school systems, so that every school in New Hampshire has the same kinds of learning opportunities.
Thank you, very concise. I'm going to drop down to Bill Ardinger.
I think that the title in the second point, round 1 definition of the problem, is a misnomer. School funding is a complex system. It's got governance issues, how much states delegate to local units. It's got appropriations issues. How do we spend state dollars to support public education everywhere throughout the state? It's got revenue issues. What are the right kind of taxes? Who pays those taxes? All of those. So I think that there are lots of problems. In general, I see New Hampshire system working pretty well. But in 20%, 25% of the cases, 30% of the cases, I see New Hampshire system on the appropriation side failing communities who are most in need, who are most disadvantaged by various factors that we're examining together. And so the top priority issue for me is to remedy the appropriation, the distribution formula, so that the money goes out not on a per pupil basis everywhere regardless of need, but from point 1, the money goes out targeted to alleviate disparities and provide opportunity for everyone. That's my top priority issue.
Thank you, Bill. Mary Heath.
I was just reading over what I sent you weeks ago, and everything has changed so much. All of a sudden, I feel like we need to know where we're going in education, because first of all, we want to really know what we want a New Hampshire graduate to look like, and what are the programs and initiatives and opportunities that we need to put in place to get them there. And what does that mean in terms of our fiscal responsibility? And what does that mean in terms of a formula? And is a formula really what we're looking for? So those are just a couple of thoughts, because I think what the last few weeks, actually 2.5 months, have given me pause to think about what it is we're trying to accomplish. And will school look like it has looked like in the past? And I feel like we need a plan of different ways that we need to get to wherever we're going.
Thanks, Mary. Dick Ames, you're up.
Okay, I think I'm going to be a little more pedantic and task-oriented. What I would say is that the overview is the first 2 paragraphs of the Commission's assignment. We've got one here in paragraph 1. And then the second refers to the legal framework that we're working within. And I think we always have to keep that in mind. I assume we don't want to go off on some tangent, although we can certainly interpret what that framework is. And then I would say I would start with paragraph 3 in my brief narrative, affirming what the definition of adequate education is. And I would embrace in that task the look at parts of that existing definition that need to be modified. So try to figure out what an adequate education is, and then the next part of my narrative would be determining the unit costs, which is in paragraph 4 here, of providing an adequate education, including differentiated aid, which is responsive to disparities. We've talked a lot about disparities, and that's where disparities kick into, I think, my formulation of this task. And then having the cost of an adequate education in mind as best we can, we need to go to how to fund it. And that is picked up in the, I believe it's the Fiscal Neutrality, paragraph 2, which talks about revenues that are raised, but in a fiscally neutral way that doesn't push some towns to provide less and other places to provide more. So that's where I'd pick that up. And of course, to fund it in a constitutionally acceptable way, again, with room for interpretation and argument about what that constitutional framework is. And I think that's done. That does it.
That's your time. Great. Thank you. Thanks, Dick. Chris Dwyer, you're up next.
I'll just read what I wrote. The problem is to figure out how to target the full mix of education funding resources to those schools that have limited capacity for any number of reasons to provide educational opportunities at the level of 21st century quality.
Thank you. Very concise. Jay?
Working from an outcome. If the outcomes are, well, if the constitutional definition is opportunity and advantages of education, the outcomes ought to lead towards literacy, workforce preparation, and citizenship. Second, we need to equalize our support for opportunity, and we need to define the opportunity for an adequate education.
Thanks, Jay. Dropping to Iris, you're next.
I will have time to yield. I only have 1 sec. To update the definition and costing of an adequate education and create and fund a distribution formula that is equitable for all public school students.
Thank you. So far, you hold the record of 13 seconds.
I'm proud of that.
Corinne, you're next.
Okay, thanks. So I wrote local property tax contributions must be based proportionately on property wealth and funding all mandates equally. So I've got fragmented sentences. I wouldn't recommend throwing out or getting rid of the current formula, but adapting the current use of disparity aid formula by adding the unfunded mandates to include college and career readiness as an expected outcome. Something to think about is each local school district awards a state high school diploma, and the credits vary from district to district. So that may come into play. And as Mary was saying, remote learning is going to change how our programs are going to look. And I think it's going to break the traditional mold. And some will choose to go remote learning, some will choose a hybrid, and some will choose, full-time on campus. But the question comes down is we don't award diplomas to home education students. How is that going to be different from remote learning? That's not an answer for us to answer, but it's about that changing landscape. So that's it.
Thanks, Corinne. Good reminder of how important it is to have people like Barbara, Corinne, Dave on this commission, grounding us in what's actually happening in schools. Mel, you're next on my screen.
Just a simple statement here. It's a question is how do we address the inequitable funding of schools to ensure that students have an equitable education and a quality education regardless of where they reside?
Thank you. And Val, Sancho?
Very similar, to develop a equitable funding mechanism that provides equity of opportunities for students to acquire an education that will allow them to be productive members of a modern society.
Thank you. And John Beardmore.
Under our Constitution, a student in the most socioeconomically disadvantaged town needs to be guaranteed the same state-funded adequate education as students receive in wealthy towns. How do we cost out that education, allocate the resources, and provide accountability that ensures this requirement is met?
Thanks for your thoughtful responses, everybody. I think that catches, I think I got everybody, all the commission members here. What I thought I would do, Dave, Mel, and Jay, you all constitute the leadership of this commission. So I thought I'd ask the three of you to first be the ones to reflect on what you just heard. Other people may want to make a few comments after that, but I want to try to keep this fairly tight and concise so that we can also turn to the second part of this conversation, which is taking apart these notions of disparities, inputs, outcomes, all of which were just mentioned, but that'll peel the onion back another layer. So I'm going to start with Mel and then Jay and then Dave. Any reflections on what you just heard across those definitions of the problem?
Well, it appears to me that the issue of equity is key to what we ultimately end up will do. And I think that equity also reflects the question of adequacy, both adequacy from an educational standpoint and also equity from a standpoint of a funding source or funding of the adequate education.
Thanks. Jay, what struck you? What stood out for you?
Yeah, well, the word equalize and equity emerging both in terms of funding and in terms of opportunity. I also picked up different definitions of outcomes, but did hear college, workforce, citizenship. And then around defining opportunity or adequate education, either way, kind of the term, but the notion of capacity of different communities to provide equity in opportunity.
Thanks. And Dave, what stood out for you? What struck you? Oh, yeah, you're muted, Dave.
Yeah, I thought I talked so long last time. I'll just, but the things along the same lines as what Jay and Mel were just talking about. I think the how important outcomes are when evaluating the opportunity for an adequate education, and no matter where you live, and I think I heard several sort of mentions, either directly or came right up beside it, the concept of fiscal neutrality being an important theme, particularly the part where you know it shouldn't cost one community 10 times the effort to provide that equitable opportunity than it would take to do so in another community.
Other commission members want to just reflect on what you heard. What do you think were the most common sort of convergent ideas across those comments? Barbara?
I think that we almost all of us use some equitable was the word that I kept picking up again and again. And it seemed like we went back to equitable opportunities, both from the point of educational opportunities, but also the fiscal aspect of the opportunity. So that's just a couple of notes. I was kind of keeping a little tally as we went through and just seemed to be coming up again and again.
Great, thank you. Thanks. Bill Ardinger?
Yeah, I definitely heard equitable many times. I'm still concerned about what people mean by equitable. What I mean by equitable is if we have $700 million of state tax revenues in the Education Trust Fund, that it comes out on a formula to the 25% of school districts that are most in need first, and it builds capacity in those districts to restore their opportunity to provide a good education to a level. That's before a dollar goes to other communities that are very well resourced. That means I am opposing the concept of adequacy aid going out on a per pupil basis on like base adequacy under current law. That's what I mean by equity, and that's what I think I heard. Equity does not mean go out equally to every town regardless of their capacity. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Yeah, absolutely grappling with equalizing and equity is a critical theme here. And I'm hearing, again, sort of the two simultaneous constructs around equity. One is this notion of what the student's educational experience is, equitable experience and opportunities for students, and then equity in the way that we treat taxpayers and communities in terms of their capacity to raise funds. Any other comments before we shift to the next topic? Yeah, Iris.
Make sure I'm unmuted. Yeah. I agree with some of what Bill said in terms of aid should go first to the neediest, but I don't think this 25% that you floated is realistic or practical. I remember in John Tobin's presentation, he said that over 70% of districts were what he would call poor. And I just don't understand how we can move to a system where some districts get nothing in order to create equity. I would raise Dave's issue about Hopkinton. I don't think of Hopkinton as a poor town, but how would they feel if they got no state aid? So I think this is way more complex than drawing a line at 25% and sending money there.
It's super complex, no question. And this conversation we're having right now is absolutely iterative. We'll be coming back to this, but I think this is helping us begin to sort of delineate where, again, back to our notion of where the guardrails are. And Chris has—
I'd just like to add also that not only do I think it's politically unfeasible, but I don't agree with Bill that it's constitutionally feasible either.
Chris.
Yeah, I think the similarities are across these are kind of superficial, and there are just with, as Iris started to say, there are actually a lot of differences in perspective, and I think we need to begin to ground ourselves in where the similarities are and where the differences are. I think we're sort of at a pivot point. We've had lots of information given to us, and we need to start codifying the principles where we do have agreement and make them more specific statements so that, you know, we don't get tangled up in the equity, equitability, equalization kind of language, but that we start to talk about what's the framework of what we can ground ourselves in and that we can agree upon, where are the areas where we have differences of opinion, to begin sorting this out. And it's really a move from what's the problem to what are we understanding some of the core aspects of the solution. Because I think there are just lots of differences in the way people frame this that maybe mask bigger differences that we have around going forward.
So 2 comments, and then we're going to move to the next round of discussion. One is to remind us that we'll have additional input on how adequacy has been interpreted and implemented in other places. Drew is on the call with us today. Towards the end, in about 25 minutes or so, Drew will remind us of the current work that AIR is doing on our behalf to provide some comparative information about adequacy from a legislative and judicial perspective in other key comparative states. And I've lost my, whatever the second part of that point was that I was going to make, so I'm going to skip it. Oh, I know what it was, and that is tagging on to Chris's comment here. The third stage of design thinking is to what's called to ideate, and that is begin to generate ideas around the solution to the problem. So we're gonna toggle back and forth and between definition, and then gradually over the next, I'm sure, few weeks, move towards the beginning of sort of ideation, whether it's talking about a 75% figure or a 25% figure, or you know, other components that we've begun to surface up now. But I think there's no question that this challenge is much more complicated than we can handle in a 45-minute conversation at this point. We'll be coming back to that. But as we go down the road, we'll begin to create ideas to test, and then we'll start to test those ideas and as you arrive at your recommendations as the summer goes on. So the second part of this challenge then is to make sure that we have thought about what goes into the notion of an adequate education, both from an input side and an outcome side. And again, you have this document in front of you. I'll take this off in a minute. But I'm going to ask you to do the same thing. Is look at page 2 of the design thinking document and think about what's missing here, essentially. I mean, I've listed for you the kinds of things we've been talking about for some time now in terms of inputs, student inputs, family inputs, community inputs, school inputs, and then outcomes, the kinds of things that Jay was just mentioning. I think he talked about citizenship, workforce needs, student experience, and then issues of equity, again, of opportunity, experience, outcomes, an equitable financing system. So I've left here a number of blanks so you can add on to this. So I'm going to give you a few minutes to, again, sort of reground yourself in what these components of differentiation or disparities are that are at the root of equities and inequities. And then we'll come back for the same kind of round robin sharing after a few minutes of your own individual work. Another minute or so on this. Okay, about to wrap this up. Okay, let's go ahead and again, listen carefully to what each of us has to say. We'll be recording all this and taking notes, but just capture what's most important to you in a minute or so. I'm gonna go in reverse order this time. This may not be precisely reverse because all the squares, tiles on my screen, I think moved around. But I'm gonna start with John Beardmore in the lower right-hand corner on my screen and then go to Val and then Mel and so on. So John?
You know, I don't have any really great thoughts to add. One data point that I think is important on the outcome slide is graduation rate. Some of the professionals on this team might have better insight into how materially that differs from district to district. But I suspect it's probably material and could be a reliable data point. I struggle with the concept of capacity to fund education locally because of what we learned about in regards to the census survey on local, demographics, economic data points at the town level. You know, I know we rely heavily on equalized value per pupil, and I think that's an important data point, and I would be willing to bet we're going to use it in some way or another. But I think we need more than just equalized value per pupil and free and reduced price lunch for fiscal capacity, but I'm not sure what we can get that's reliable.
Yeah,
so that's what I have to add.
Saw a number of heads nodding there, and I think our colleagues at AIR will help us take that apart as well. Val, you're next on my screen.
I think the curse of local control, to me, is one of the biggest issues we have to overcome, because each little fiefdom has its own culture, fiscal capacity, expectations, and for the state to provide some sort of common denominator to all those things, I think is going to be difficult, because it's not a top-down culture here, and that makes it difficult to find the common point that all of these different perspectives and capabilities would come to agree with. So I think that's I think, as Ira said, is there are a lot of political considerations here that make it difficult. I think you could probably get a third grader to figure out how to do this right, but politically, you need to be a PhD in many different subjects to get it to all work. And I think that balance is going to be the difficult thing, as it has been through all the various iterations of school funding through the years. So I don't think our challenge is any different in that way. We just have perhaps more experience with what worked and what didn't work, and hopefully can come up with a recommendation that is easier for everyone to at least agree to in some way, shape, or form.
Thanks, Al. Mel, you're next.
Well, you know, we can list all kinds of metrics issues. You know, we can talk about size, rural, poverty, level of income in a town, level of education in a town, what the sociometrics of that town might look like, the age of the school, the experience of the staff, the technology capacity in a given area. I mean, obviously in some of the rural areas, we've discovered with this remote learning has been very challenging. But one of the things that I don't think is on the list, that I'm not sure how you measure, but that's the issue of school leadership. I think school leadership plays a key role here, whether it be at the building level or at the district level. And I can recall coming back from the state after being away and after I retired from the national organization and coming back and looking at a school like Pittsfield. You know, John Freeman there as a superintendent has done a wonderful job from a leadership standpoint. Now, he's got limited capacity, he's got limited resources, but he's been able to provide some leadership there that at least has been trying to overcome some of the inequities that a school like his has. And so I'm not sure how you really look at the question from a metric standpoint and measure school leadership, but I think there is a role here as we begin to look at the capacity of school districts.
Yeah, a good reminder that there are probably several intangibles here that just because they're intangible or unmeasurable doesn't mean they are not important. Speaking of leadership, I'll go to Corinne next. She's on my screen.
All right, I thought one of the characteristics in the inputs should include property wealth because that varies so differently. And under school characteristics, thinking futuristic is what capabilities, it goes a little bit what somebody said already, but what capabilities and what's the participation rates for students who choose to do remote instruction? I didn't think I'd be talking about remote instruction again, but I think it's definitely going to be at the table. In terms of outcomes, again, I go back to college and career readiness because those are new indicators that we need to provide data to the state on. And I started adding another equity item, but I think it's encompassed in the others. I was thinking about support services and social emotional well-being of children, but that might be under the equity of student experiences and outcomes, so I wouldn't add it.
Great, thanks. Iris, you're next.
Thanks. Well, starting at the top, under family characteristics, I didn't understand what structure meant or how it was relevant. I do think that the educational level of the family or the community is a big factor. In terms of fiscal capacity and what John was saying about equalized valuation, median family income is another measure, but I agree we need to come up with some way to measure fiscal capacity. In terms of school characteristics, I don't know if it goes there or student characteristics, but I think it bears weight in terms of whether a district has full-day kindergarten and how many of its entering students have had a preschool experience. And also, and I'll be happy to hear me say this, when we had our presentation to the Adequacy Commission about career technical education, I was struck about this as an issue kind of in reverse, that at a school where that was contained within, like in Concord, that over 60% of students took advantage of taking some coursework that was within that curriculum. And I think that's an opportunity that our students who aren't engaged in career technical education should have everywhere. I agree that graduation rates are a measure of student success I'd like to see considered. I don't like relying totally on standardized test results. And workforce needs, what are kids doing after they graduate? And constitutionally speaking, the whole purpose of public education is to create an educated citizenry. So I wish we had some way of measuring civic engagement post-graduation, even if it was something as simple as how many 18-year-olds have registered to vote. That's a weird one, I know, but it was a thought. That's it.
Thank you. Great. Jay, you're next.
Thanks. My thoughts. So when I think of equity of experience, I'm thinking of student success. And so I'm intrigued that when I'm thinking of it, early childhood education, alternative education, like an alternative degree that somebody drops out but doesn't really drop out, and they have that, or they don't in some communities, alternative education opportunities. And the varying degrees of work-based and experiential, hands-on. So again, back to the CTE, career technical education. All these things are kind of outside what we fund currently. So I have this dilemma of trying to determine the extent to which student success, the factors towards student success that we know make a difference for the students on the margins. How does that factor in? And so I'm flummoxed by this. And outcomes, I found myself struggling with, is literacy an outcome? Because then it means you are or you're illiterate. But you know, we have the same wording with proficiency. You are either proficient or you're not proficient. And so I think proficiency needs to be a part of our outcomes language.
Great, thank you. And Chris.
Yes, to student characteristics, home language, I would add to that list, as well as students that have 2 or 3 or more adverse childhood experiences, the ACEs. Certainly agree on education level with family characteristics. In some states, I think in some parts of our state, substance affected families is becoming in some areas a major part of adding up to the ACEs. So I would think that would be true here as well. In terms of capacity to raise funds for schools, the proportion of residential to commercial, given our property tax base, is a piece of that. Median household income, as someone said, I think there's something to be said for the history of quality education within a community that has that history of knowing what that looks like. Certainly access to early childhood opportunities as it breaks down by the different characteristics of poverty, language, etc. The percent with access to the internet. I certainly agree about leadership for school characteristics. I think there's something about culture in schools that can be potentially characterized by perceptions of choice, student and parent satisfaction with their perceptions of opportunity and choice. We haven't talked about discipline, but there are also, you know, the disciplinary push-outs as it relates again to the characteristics of poverty, race, etc. We've talked about, I think there's community well-being under outcomes. I think there's perceived community desirability is an outcome in terms of education. I really like the idea of the civic engagement outcomes that Iris mentioned. And I do think choice comes in here, the perception of choice, the perception of pathway, as well as the post-secondary experiences, whether it's workforce, military, or college, but viable post-secondary experiences.
Thanks, Chris. Dick Ames.
Okay. Well, I would just say we definitely, as part of our job, have to recognize that there are disparities that affect the cost of education and the outcomes of the educational experience. And so the question is, what are those disparities? And for me, I'd look in the first instance to the experts that we've hired to help us explore that. I think that there clearly are known disparities that affect educational outcome, and one of them is socioeconomic, and free and reduced price lunch is the proxy that seems to be most available. And then an English as a second language learner, clearly there's something extra there that needs to be provided. And special education is another sort of standout characteristic, if you will, where that need needs to be provided for as we think about something more than what the child without special needs needs to get. And always outcomes are relevant to considering what the inputs should be at the level that would provide a cost of an adequate education. I think all of that's informed by research, and there's a lot out there, and I'm delighted we've got AIR to walk us through that.
Thanks, Dick. Mary, you're up.
Hi. I never know whether to go quantitative or qualitative, so I'm just going with what I came up in my writing with. So I don't know where, I think I read this someplace or not, but New Hampshire will provide a high quality education to every student within New Hampshire, regardless of wealth, income, educational background, or zip code, as not only a matter of constitutional obligation, but a matter of generational responsibility. It will be the means by which children grow into active participants in our democracy and productive members of our economy with the tools of self-reflection, personal growth to ensure happiness, successful and fulfilled lives that fully unlock their potential, utilize their skills, and realize their dreams. Students graduating with these attributes become high-achieving employees, employers, community participants, and contribute to the well-being of our society. So it's just, I needed to get to that place. So what is it that we're trying to do? And I definitely think that our property taxes, local and state, should not be the only vehicle to fund education in the state of New Hampshire. So that's my thinking.
Thanks, Mary. If you have the citation or source for what you read, or if those are your own words, just send those along to us, please.
Okay.
Bill Ardinger.
Yes, in looking at the sheet that was distributed, which broke things down, but inputs and outputs, I found those terms not helpful descriptors. So I used fiscal indicators, household indicators, and education indicators. Those are capacity indicators. Everyone has talked about the ones that should be in it, and AIR is going to be a great resource to help us with that. Fiscal indicators should include not only equalized valuation, but also local tax effort. Some communities, even though they've got a good tax base, may not be taxing themselves highly enough, because of politics. ELL, very important. Graduation rates, second, student safety measures is a data point that's being used a lot now in these around the country. I think we may be able to collect them. I would ask AIR, it is our job to measure and present the differences among school districts. We're all thinking it's different, but we should come up with a real methodology, an index, a composite of all of these factors that ranks school districts in terms of their capacity to provide an educational opportunity. A great New Hampshire Education Opportunity Index. The final point is to Val. Val, what's interesting about politics is that this commission is an independent legislative commission. We have legislative members, but our job is not to imagine what is politically possible. It is to produce what is the right answer, and then let our legislators battle through trying to get the right answer. But I think the commission has leeway to try to propose the right answer.
Thanks, Bill. Jane, and then Barbara and Susan. And Dave. Jane.
What I wrote down, much of it has already been said. In terms of inputs, consideration being given to exceptional learners, and I use that term broadly, everything from low-income students to your ELL students, to your kids with disabilities, to those with the social and emotional and mental health challenges, that all of those things be considered. And in terms of outputs, hopefully that all students will be fully equipped for college and or career, and that they be successful citizens of New Hampshire.
Thank you. Barbara.
Thank you. I too have many of the things that already have been said, but on the student characteristics, I also added ELL. And under family characteristics, I think it's important for us to understand the substance abuse issue as well as issues that parents have with the justice system. We're finding more and more of that with our children. So we're coming to the schools with it. Under community characteristics, I added one, and we may already have covered it, is the financial stability of a community. In other words, what other resources are there? Are there businesses? Are there other sources of income? I think if we look at some of our districts, we see some very interesting dynamics there. Under school characteristics, I think you all heard it from me now a million times, the whole idea of pre-K, full day kindergarten. I also believe in extending the various career paths. I would like us to look at resources that would allow for internships or apprenticeships, things that can get our high school students out looking at the world as they consider their future, be it in a career, military, college, readiness, any of those things. I'd like us to look at those alternative opportunities as well as an alternative educational opportunity. Other ways of obtaining a diploma. So I'd like to keep us going in that direction. I think that's about it. The rest we've all talked about the equity of opportunity, and I won't go into that. So I think that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Barbara. And Susan, and then Dave.
I want to sing the chorus that many of the things that I'm thinking about have already been said, but I'll just highlight a few. I totally support the notion of pre-K and full day kindergarten access. I guess the new thing I would add is I would love to, within the community characteristics, add something that looks at the collaboration between schools and businesses. You know, in some towns, there's a very strong relationship between the two, and I think the students really benefit from that. In other cases, there's a huge separation, and that affects what happens in our classrooms. I also would like to add to the school characteristics under teacher qualifications, access for teachers to professional development. To somebody else's point, we're in this very much local control. Somehow or another, we have to get more information to be available to our teachers across the state rather than within individual school districts. And obviously, because of the seat I sit in, I want to see access to other opportunities with post-secondary institutions, with internships, career and college readiness, and finally, civic engagement. That really is where it all ends up for me, that if we raise children who don't then engage with their communities wherever it is they live, then I feel we've failed.
Thanks, Susan. So Dave, you're the last one on this, and then I'll ask you also just to reflect on what you've heard. Iris has her hand up. We'll do a little bit of processing. I'm conscious of the time. We do want to hear from Drew in a few minutes because several of you have made references to our relationship with AIR. But Dave, go ahead, and then a little bit of processing.
Thanks, Bruce. Real quickly, I agreed with a lot of, I had down a lot of what people were saying. Like Bill did, I sort of broke things down a little bit differently. I had sort of like a first general category of cost side equity, and then the other category of revenue side equity. And because I think they both break out very differently. And on the cost side, just things I would add or add on to on outcomes, the health and joyfulness of students. And I use the term joyfulness because I know that at least I interview kids who are applying to MIT. That's actually a question on the rating thing. How did you feel their joyfulness was? So health and joyfulness there. I agree with exactly what Jay's saying about proficiency, particularly in speaking skills, writing skills. I think are so important, and success is so tied to those two things, success in life. On the revenue equity, I would say the sustainability and reliability of revenue sources to be independent of economic conditions, and I think that falls into sort of what I think a couple people say. I think Bill mentioned it. I think Chris may have mentioned it, but within this burden limit that we're so far beyond in so many communities right now, they're just, you know, they're broken through anything that's potentially sustainable. Yeah, I would just leave it at that.
Great, thank you. And we're, you know, a few folks have 4 o'clock commitments, so a couple of people had to drop out right now. And what I'm hearing from this, I'll just reflect briefly, is possibly a kind of a reframing or reorganizing of how we think about either disparities or equity in terms of the fiscal side as well as the student side. Bill and Dave and others have offered suggestions for ways to kind of restructure the framework that we're using here. Iris, you have a hand up, and then I do want to go to Drew fairly quickly before we wrap up.
Just real quick, I failed to mention that I really believe strongly the concentrations of poverty need to be considered at the school level.
Good, thank you. Again, we're capturing all of this, and we'll come back to you with revised documents as we move along. But I do feel like today we've both had a good conversation just in listening to each other's points of view, but also beginning to delineate better or frame better the problem itself and all of the components of the problem. You know, as somebody who's both an observer and participant in this process, it does feel to me like we're peeling back the layers of this onion, and we're having a different kind of a conversation now than we did 2 months ago. It's a reassurance that we're making progress. Drew, I'll ask you to remind us of what the priority tasks are for AAR right now, when we might expect those, and how they fit into the conversation that you've been listening to.
Yeah, I think the conversation has been great. So thank you for having me. I think the conversation has affirmed that I think the approach that AIR has proposed is a good approach, and I think a lot of the questions that you all have posed will be answered by the work that AIR is doing. Just a quick note on the things that we're currently working on. We're currently working on a series of briefs that we will provide to you on a rolling basis. So we currently have several of these briefs done. We were waiting on the contract to finally be signed, and I just got an email right before this meeting that said the contract was signed. So that's great. So we can start sending over some of that material. I'll start sending it over right after this meeting to the leadership team, and they can distribute it from there. But we currently have 3 briefs ready to go that kind of outline from a methodological perspective, what are the different possible approaches to doing a cost analysis to figure out how much it should cost to provide an adequate education. From there, we nail down into some more specific approaches that we will be taking as part of our work on this project. And then we get into things like setting outcome goals with relation to the approach that we're going to take to define what it costs to provide an adequate education. And then, as Bruce mentioned earlier in the call, we'll provide some examples from other states on the approaches that they have taken through their education finance reforms to go about defining an adequate education, the cost analyses that have been done that have informed the legislation that ultimately came out of that, and then how the legislation kind of matched up to the cost analyses. What changes were made from the cost analysis to the actual legislation that was passed. So we have several states that will be doing that for, and then we're also working on kind of a 50-state overview of the types of things that different states include in their formulas or approaches to funding education. So whether that be different types of measures of economic disadvantage, EL, et cetera, what are the things that states are doing to differentiate funding across their districts? So those are kind of the briefs that we're working on. The other important thing that we really haven't done a whole lot of work on yet, and we're hoping for some help from the commission, is on data collection. I know this is going to have to be the next big thing that we're going to undertake, is data collection. And hearing some of the data points that you all mentioned was very helpful, but I also want to caution that our approach will be necessitated by having actual data that's reliable at the district level, or even if it's not at the district level, maybe at other levels that are still somewhat differentiated across districts, whether that be towns or counties or whatever, what have you. But we'll have to figure out what data is available that we can collect relatively quickly. And then from that point, we have a risk analysis. I know Bill mentioned something along those lines, where we will look at the outcomes in different districts and what are the various characteristics using the data points that we got that are indicative of those outcomes. And then from there, we go into our cost modeling approach, which will help us define the cost of providing equal opportunity across districts and an adequate education. So that's what we have on our docket.
That's great. And for the other members here, AAR has given us a request of the kind of data that they need to have access to. Dave's been working with Caitlin Davies at DOE to identify those data sources. We're responding to that request, Drew. We have a draft to send back to you, and that'll come back to you within the next day or so, probably by tomorrow. And we'll connect your team directly with Caitlin as well through me, so that you can be sure that you have access to what you need. Not everything that you are looking for in the first round is available at DOE. It's available maybe in some other sources, and we'll help you find that from Reaching Higher, from the School Fair Funding Project, and other sources as well, DRA, et cetera.
Yep, sounds good.
Thank you. Dave, it's back to you. And then just a reminder, Dave, to let people know, especially those that are listening, about our plans for future public comment opportunities.
Right. That's really all I wanted to spend time on, because I know we're just a couple minutes over right now, and I want to be respectful of people's time. But we've been, slowly expanding our reach and participation, particularly for the attendees who want to view these meetings. And we've been collecting public comment since we began holding remote meetings via email, essentially, or cutting and paste stuff out of the Q&A. And Jordan's been diligent to keep track of all that and to make sure Commission captures that information. But next time we meet as a commission will be on the June 22nd, and we'd like to sort of reserve the last 20 minutes or so of that meeting for public comment. People have heard a lot, and I think there is a huge advantage of having live, contemporaneous public comment. I know I really enjoy hearing from it and hearing what people say in such an impassioned, strong way. And so on June 22nd, we'd like to, we will open it up, and hopefully it goes smoothly. You know, hopefully we can keep people to you know, to a couple of minutes max on that, and the comments will, as they've always been, you know, respectful and helpful to the members of the commission. So that's probably the biggest announcement I'd like to make. And otherwise, we'll keep everybody posted on how June 22nd develops, what's in store for that, and I guess we'll be back next Monday with work groups. Anything else, Bruce?
Not for me. Anybody else? Go to the order.
Mel? Or anybody else want to add anything? Thank you all very much. I hope you all felt it was a productive meeting. I really enjoyed the robust dialogue, and Bruce, thanks for facilitating. And I see Bill's got the thumbs up, so so great. Everybody be well. We'll be in touch over email between now and next Monday. Feel free to give a shout or email. We'll see y'all soon.